All right. This one's like my navigating a minefield. This one's gonna people feel very passionate about this issue. We're talking about the uh, Chief Justice being brought to Parliament, being brought before the DP. The DP pushed for the audit, and they had the Chief Justice there before them. So let me kind of set the stage, right? So that we're all operating at the same level of understanding. Um, During the primary, Lee Jae-myung won the primary, but during the primary, uh, Lee Jae-myung was dealing with court cases, specifically this one about his election, his previous election. And we're not going to get into the nuance of the court case. That's neither here nor there. However, what we are going to talk about is the ruling. He originally, in the first court, lost the case, and so he appealed. And if he had lost his appeal, he would not be eligible to run in the election. So, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. And before we go on, I want to say something about the U.S. courts and how they operate. And I believe that how courts in general operate. And they operate in a way that they are supposed to appear non-political. Now, putting to the side, of course, they are 1,000% political, but they are supposed to appear non-political. And so I say that because the moves that were made, we'll get to that. Um, so in the court case, Lee Jae-myung won his appeal. He won his appeal. And essentially that meant he can continue on in the race and go into the general election with no worries. Um, and so we thought, except the Supreme Court did something that was unexpected. And they moved incredibly fast on a ruling to overturn the appellate court and essentially send it back to the appellate court to make a new ruling. Now, typically, this is supposed to take months. A ruling's made on a case. This is supposed to take months. The Supreme Court has determined, are we going to take this case? They then need to read the facts in the case, and then they need to come to a ruling on the case. The turnaround on this was unusually quick. This is something that angered a lot of liberals, is that it appeared that the Supreme Court went out of its way to speed up the process so that they could rule on the case and overturn the ruling of the appellate court. Essentially, what liberals are saying is it appears to them that the Supreme Court colluded with conservatives to get E out of the race, because at that point, E was the projected frontrunner in the race, likely to win. Um, uh, and the PPP had just done a self coup and didn't do it well. And so their approval ratings were in the toilet. They were hoping, or they believed that the collusion between Han Duck-soo, the former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, and the chief of the Supreme Court colluded together to get rid of E so that Han Duck-soo could have a better chance in the race. Caveats galore. There's a bunch of things that I am skipping over and not laying out here, but that is the premise of where the DP feels was that the Supreme Court overturned. In here, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this. South Korea's top court overturned presidential frontrunner's criminal case. This was huge. This was a huge thing. South Korea's Supreme Court overturned on Thursday an earlier ruling that had cleared frontrunner Lee Jae-myung of election law violations, throwing into doubt his eligibility to run for the presidency. Now, let's just touch on that really quick because I think that is something that has to be addressed. Is that the courts in the US go out of their way to not appear political. And knowing that in Korea, when the president is removed from office, you have 60 days. 60 days to have an election. That's it. That's all you get. 60 days. And so, knowing that in actuality, there is no way for the court to actually make a ruling on the case, one way or the other. For me, I ask the question, why would the court go out of its way to expedite their ruling, even though they know a final ruling can't be had? That's the question I have. That's what I put out there. That's what I posit. But let's continue with the story. The candidate of the Liberal Democratic Party, which controls parliament, leads opinion polls, blah, blah, blah. Let's skip ahead. The election law violation case against Lee has been closely watched since the ruling that could remove him from the ballot deepens further division in society. After months of political turmoil that had hampered efforts to steer Asia's fourth largest economy through the choppy waters of U.S. tariffs, in March, an appeals court had cleared E of violating election law, but prosecutors had appealed the decision to the Supreme Court. E is embroiled in multiple criminal scandals, but election law case was the spotlight because if the Supreme Court overturned E's not guilty verdict and it is finalized, it would bar him from contesting elections for at least 5 years. That's the context. That's the context that all of this takes place in, is that if the Supreme Court was able to put in a ruling that bans E, this opens the doorway for a potential conservative. Let's continue. The Supreme Court said that E violated election law by publicly stating false facts and ruled to send the case back to the appeals court. While the Supreme Court moved unusually fast to consider Lee's election law case, it gave no deadline for the lower court, which usually takes months to revisit rulings, and it was unclear if it would come in before the June 3rd election. Now, let me just say this. That is weird. And I'm not even talking from like political, like I have a position on which side. That is weird. Why is the Supreme Court moving with such haste to try to get a verdict on a case that it knows it can't give a final verdict on? Why do that? That is the question that the Democratic Party is asking. That's the question that sets up the confrontation that we have that's coming to a head now. Because the DP, he did wind up winning the election, obviously. But the DP have now gone and said, hey, you need to come answer some questions. And take a look at this. Top court chief justices, it's from the Korea Time. The top court justice voices opposition to judges taking stands at a parliamentary audit. I think this is interesting. Cho expressed concerns over the request for his appearance as a witness for the audit, citing a law that prohibits parliamentary audits for interviewing in an ongoing trial. So he's trying to say that E's case, which has been postponed, by the way, due to him being president. The Chief Justice said that the court had submitted answers on written questions made beforehand, adding the head of the National Court Administration would answer remaining questions or he would answer them in his closing remarks. Now, let me back up a little bit. Why is the Democratic Party so convinced that Cho was involved with this potential collusion, trying to get rid of Lee Jae-myung? Well, I haven't touched it on this channel. I actually have purposely put it to the side as I wanted to get into some more domestic stuff. We haven't touched the coup that's happened. But the former prime minister ran for president, and it seems he had major connections with said coup, and that he had lied to the courts. Um, and it is potential that the Supreme Court justice has met up. He won't answer whether he has or hasn't, but if met up with former prime minister, the former prime minister. And so let's take a look at this, because I think this really contextualizes why the DP feels like they need to stake their claim. They need to be aggressive on this. This is the makeup of the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has 14 justices, including the Chief Justice. And Choi Dae is the Chief Justice. He was appointed by Yoon Suk-yeol, a conservative. The next one was appointed by Moon Jae-in, a liberal, a liberal, a liberal, and a liberal. Only 4 liberal justices. Every other justice on the Supreme Court is a conservative. Now, again, they claim to be above political fray. They claim to be nonpartisan, but let's be real. They're humans. They're people. They have agendas. They all do. Whether this is Korea, whether it's America, whatever. They all have agendas. However, there are question marks here. There are question marks. And the whole point of the courts is to ensure that when they're making rulings, that they are staked with legitimacy. Court does not have an army or police force to enforce the laws that they rule on. Their legitimacy comes from public trust. And the public cannot trust them, then how do they know that the rulings are being made in earnest? Well, I'll say this. The DP also needs to be careful, because moving heavy-handedly on something like this can blow back in your face, as it could be seen as weaponization of the government. Whether, and you know, I don't really know how you move forward here. I don't really know how you tackle this. But I do know that it does need to be done with kid gloves, because you are in a position where, yeah, if this was corruption, collusion, it does need to be found out and it does need to be investigated. However, separations of powers do exist, meaning that, you know, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and judicial branch, they you shouldn't really be stepping on each other's toes and marching people before the legislative branch. It's seen as, you know, a violation of the separation of powers. However, criminal conduct cannot be left alone. So, you know, it's one of these things of the Democratic Party is in a tough spot, because there are questions. And listen, let's be fair. There are oddities. However, I think if the DP feels emboldened, if they think their hand is stronger than it is, this could blow back in their face. Because again, you know, you are attacking an institution that in and of itself already has low public trust. And you yourselves as an institution have low public trust. It's one of these things that we got to keep our eyes on. So one of these things that is interesting. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on this. This is to see where this goes. This is actually one of the stories I was waiting to see on why I didn't do a show last week. This was one of the stories I was waiting to see and seeing where things go. That's going to do it for me. That is going to be it. That's the show. If you guys disagreed with something, let me know. If I got something wrong, write it down there in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe. It really, really, again, helps this channel grow. And yeah, thank you. All right. I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked that video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you have a comment, go ahead and leave it down there in the comments. Thank you. See you in the next one.